Emma's trembling fingers clutched her last $20 bill. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like dying insects, casting harsh shadows across her exhausted face. Outside, rain hammered the windows, while a homeless man pressed his weathered hands against the glass, his hollow eyes pleading for warmth. Her rent was due tomorrow, her cupboards were empty, yet something deeper than hunger stirred within her chest. In this moment, Waitress uses her last tip to pay for a homeless man's dinner, unaware he's a disguised billionaire. Would become more than just a story. It would become the turning point that shattered everything she thought she knew about kindness and consequence. Subscribe to witness how one act of compassion can rewrite destiny itself. The coffee maker sputtered its final breath as Emma wiped down the same table for the third time, her movements mechanical and hollow. The Moonlight Diner stood nearly empty at 11:30 on this Tuesday night, its checkered floors reflecting the neon glow from the street outside. Her uniform clung to her tired frame, stained with the remnants of a 12-hour shift that had yielded exactly $20 in tips, money that should have been her lifeline but felt more like a cruel joke. The register's harsh fluorescent light illuminated the dark circles beneath her eyes, shadows that spoke of sleepless nights spent calculating bills that never seemed to shrink. Her manager had already left, trusting her to lock up, unaware that she was counting every minute until she could collapse into her studio apartment and pretend tomorrow wouldn't bring the same crushing weight of financial desperation. The rain outside had intensified, creating a symphony of despair against the windows, each droplet echoing the tears she refused to shed. Her phone buzzed against the counter, displaying a text from her landlord that made her stomach clench with familiar dread. "Rent due tomorrow, no extensions." The words blurred as exhaustion clouded her vision, and she gripped the edge of the counter until her knuckles turned white. 24 years old, and she felt ancient, worn down by a system that demanded everything while giving nothing in return. Her college degree hung uselessly on her apartment wall, an expensive piece of paper that had promised a future, now buried beneath student loan payments and the harsh reality of minimum wage survival. The diner's clock ticked with merciless precision, each second bringing her closer to a tomorrow she couldn't afford to face. Her last tip money lay crumpled in her apron pocket, warm from her body heat, representing the thin line between having a roof over her head and joining the countless souls who wandered the streets outside. The weight of that $20 bill felt heavier than any burden she had ever carried. Through the rain-streaked window, she noticed a figure huddled beneath the broken streetlight across the street. The man's silhouette was bent against the storm, his clothes dark with moisture, his posture speaking of defeat that resonated deep within her chest. She had seen him before, always at a distance, always alone, moving through the city like a ghost that society had forgotten. His presence stirred something uncomfortable within her, a recognition of how thin the line was between her current struggle and his complete abandonment. The diner's warmth suddenly felt precious and fragile, a temporary sanctuary that could be stripped away with a single missed payment. Her reflection in the window showed a young woman on the edge of her own precipice, staring at a future that could easily mirror the homeless man's present. The storm seemed to intensify as she watched him, as if nature itself was testing the boundaries of human endurance. Something deep in her chest began to ache, a pain that had nothing to do with her own circumstances and everything to do with the shared humanity she recognized in his hunched shoulders. The man moved closer to the diner's window, and Emma could see his face more clearly now, weathered by time and hardship, but holding eyes that still carried traces of dignity despite his circumstances. His beard was unkempt, his clothes layered and worn, yet there was something in his bearing that suggested he hadn't always lived this way. She found herself studying his features, wondering what series of events had led him to this moment, what dreams had been abandoned along the way. The glass between them felt like a barrier between two different worlds, yet she sensed they were more alike than different. both struggling against forces beyond their control, both fighting to maintain their humanity in a world that seemed determined to strip it away. His eyes met hers through the window, and for a moment, time suspended itself in that connection. The recognition was instant and profound. Two souls acknowledging each other's pain across the divide of circumstance. Her heart began to race as she realized he was moving toward the diner's entrance, bringing with him a choice that would define who she truly was beneath the weight of her own struggles. The bell above the door chimed with unusual clarity as he stepped inside, bringing with him the scent of rain and the indefinable smell of life lived without shelter. Water dripped from his clothes onto the checkered floor, creating small puddles that reflected the diner's harsh lighting. Emma's training kicked in automatically, but her voice caught in her throat as she tried to speak. He stood just inside the doorway, hesitant, as if unsure whether he belonged in this warm space filled with the lingering aromas of coffee and comfort food. His eyes swept the empty diner before settling on her face, and she saw something there that made her chest tighten, not just hunger for food, but a deeper starvation for human connection and dignity. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken understanding and the weight of choices that would ripple far beyond this single moment. Her hand instinctively moved to the $20 in her apron pocket, feeling its texture against her fingertips, like a prayer she wasn't sure she was brave enough to answer. The storm outside seemed to pause, as if the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what kind of person Emma would choose to be when everything was on the line. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like a mechanical heartbeat as Emma realized this moment would either break her or reveal the strength she never knew she possessed. The homeless man stood before her, vulnerable and hopeful, while her own future hung in the balance of a decision that would cost her everything she had left. Yet something deeper than fear was stirring in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the diner's heating system and everything to do with the recognition that some choices transcend personal cost. Subscribe to discover how Emma's next decision will shatter every assumption about the power of compassion. James stood in the doorway, feeling the weight of his deception settle around him like an uncomfortable cloak. Beneath the carefully cultivated appearance of homelessness lay a man worth more than most small countries' GDP. Yet in this moment, he felt more authentic than he had in years. The rain had soaked through his deliberately worn clothing, and the cold had seeped into his bones, giving him a genuine taste of the hardship he was only pretending to endure. His weathered hands, artificially aged with makeup and careful exposure to the elements, trembled not from the cold, but from the profound loneliness that had driven him to this elaborate test of human nature. For months, he had wandered the streets of different cities, searching for something that money couldn't buy, proof that genuine kindness still existed in a world that had shown him only greed and manipulation. The young waitress before him represented his last hope, though she had no idea that her response would determine not just his faith in humanity, but the direction of his vast philanthropic empire. Her eyes held a mixture of compassion and uncertainty that made his chest tighten with an emotion he had almost forgotten how to feel. The diner's warmth enveloped him like an embrace he hadn't experienced since childhood, before wealth had built walls between him and authentic human connection. Every detail of this moment was being catalogued in his memory. The way the fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the waitress's tired face, the lingering scent of coffee and fried food that spoke of simple pleasures he had long forgotten, the sound of rain against windows that reminded him of nights spent in his childhood home before empire building had consumed his soul. His fortune had been built on reading people, on understanding their motivations and weaknesses, yet this young woman's expression defied easy categorization. There was something pure in her gaze that made him feel exposed, as if she could see through his disguise to the broken man beneath. The irony wasn't lost on him. He who could buy anything was standing here as a beggar, hoping to receive something that couldn't be purchased at any price. His heart hammered against his ribs as he waited for her response, knowing that her next words would either restore his faith in humanity or confirm his darkest suspicions about the world he had helped create. Emma's voice, when it finally came, was softer than he had expected, carrying a warmth that seemed to emanate from somewhere deeper than mere politeness. "Please, come in from the rain," she said, her words cutting through the silence like a gentle blade that sliced away his cynicism. The simple invitation carried weight beyond its surface meaning. It was an acknowledgement of his humanity at a moment when he felt most inhuman. He shuffled forward, his movements deliberately uncertain, playing the role he had perfected over months of preparation, yet feeling more genuine than he had in years of boardroom performances. The puddles his wet clothes created on the floor seemed to mark his passage from one world to another, from the cold reality outside to this warm sanctuary where kindness might still exist. Her eyes followed his movement with concern rather than disgust, and he felt something crack open in his chest, a fissure in the armor he had built around his heart. The diner's simple furnishings suddenly seemed more valuable than any of the priceless art that decorated his penthouse, because they were the backdrop for this moment of potential grace. He could feel the weight of his hidden identity pressing against his consciousness. But for now, he was simply a man in need, standing before a woman who might choose to help. The silence between them stretched like a bridge. Neither was sure they should cross, yet Emma's body language spoke of a decision already forming in her heart. James watched as her hand moved unconsciously to her apron pocket, a gesture so subtle he might have missed it if he hadn't spent years learning to read the smallest tells in business negotiations. But this wasn't business. This was something far more precious and fragile. Her internal struggle was visible in the way her shoulders tensed, in the slight tremor of her lower lip, in the way her eyes darted between his face and the empty diner around them. He recognized the look of someone calculating costs they couldn't afford, weighing survival against conscience, and his heart ached with the knowledge that he was asking her to make an impossible choice. The $20 in her pocket, he could sense its presence like a divining rod, sensing water, represented more to her than the millions sitting in his offshore accounts meant to him. Yet here she stood, considering an act of generosity that would cost her everything while giving him something invaluable. The rain outside seemed to intensify, as if nature itself was testing the boundaries of human compassion, and James found himself holding his breath, waiting for her verdict on the state of the world's soul. Her eyes met his again, and in that moment James saw something that made his carefully constructed cynicism crumble like ancient parchment. There was no calculation in her gaze, no weighing of personal benefit, only a recognition of shared humanity that transcended circumstance. The fluorescent lights above seemed to soften, casting her in a glow that had nothing to do with electricity and everything to do with the inner light that poverty and struggle hadn't managed to extinguish. He realized that his test had become something else entirely, not an examination of her character, but a mirror reflecting his own lost humanity back at him. The homeless persona he wore felt suddenly shameful, not because of its appearance, but because it represented his inability to trust in goodness without proof. She was about to teach him something that all his wealth and power had failed to provide, that true richness came not from what you possessed, but from what you were willing to give away. The diner's clock ticked steadily, marking seconds that felt like eternities, while outside the storm raged on, unaware that inside this small sanctuary, two souls were about to collide in a way that would change everything. Her next words would either restore his faith in humanity or shatter it completely, and James found himself praying to a God he had forgotten in his climb to the top of the world. The moment hung suspended between them like a soap bubble, beautiful and fragile, containing within it the potential to transform both their lives in ways neither could imagine. Emma's breathing had become shallow, her chest rising and falling with the weight of a decision that would define her character for the rest of her life, while James stood frozen in anticipation, his billionaire's confidence replaced by the vulnerable hope of a man who had forgotten what it felt like to depend on another's kindness. Subscribe to witness the moment when Emma's choice reveals the true power of compassion over circumstance. Emma's fingers closed around the crumpled $20 bill in her apron pocket, feeling its worn texture like a rosary bead worn smooth by desperate prayers. The weight of her decision pressed against her chest, making each breath feel labored and significant, as if the very air in the diner had become thick with the gravity of what she was about to do. Her rent money, her survival, lay warm against her palm. Yet looking at the homeless man's weathered face, she felt something shift inside her that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with the inexplicable pull of human connection. The fluorescent lights seemed to flicker in rhythm with her heartbeat as she made a choice that defied every practical instinct she possessed. "Sir," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "would you like something warm to eat?" The words escaped her lips before her rational mind could intervene, carrying with them the weight of a decision that would leave her with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of something she couldn't name. The homeless man's eyes widened with surprise, then filled with an emotion so raw and genuine that Emma felt her own eyes begin to burn with unshed tears. In that moment, she understood that she wasn't just offering food, she was offering dignity, recognition, and the radical act of seeing someone that society had rendered invisible. The man's response came in a voice roughened by exposure and emotion, each word carefully measured as if he understood the magnitude of her offer. I don't have any money," he said, the admission carrying shame that made Emma's heart clench with recognition of her own financial struggles. But instead of retreating, she felt her resolve strengthen, fueled by a compassion that seemed to flow from some inexhaustible well within her soul. "That's okay," she replied, pulling the $20 bill from her pocket with hands that trembled not from fear, but from the profound rightness of what she was doing. The money felt different now, not like her last hope, but like a key to something far more valuable than security. She guided him to a booth near the window, where the rain continued its relentless percussion against the glass, creating a cocoon of intimacy around their unlikely encounter. The red vinyl seat creaked as he settled into it, his movements careful and grateful, as if he couldn't quite believe this moment was real. Emma found herself studying his face more closely, noting the intelligence in his eyes that spoke of a story more complex than his appearance suggested, though she couldn't have imagined the truth that lay beneath his carefully constructed disguise. The diner's familiar sounds, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant tick of the clock, seemed to fade into background music for this moment of grace unfolding between them. As Emma moved behind the counter to prepare his meal, her hands worked with a purpose that transcended mere service, each motion infused with the sacred act of caring for another human being. She selected the best ingredients available: fresh bread for a sandwich, soup that had been simmering all day, coffee that would warm him from the inside out, treating this meal not as charity, but as an offering worthy of respect. The $20 lay on the counter beside the register, no longer representing her security, but transformed into something far more powerful: proof that kindness could exist, even in the face of personal cost. James watched her work from his booth, his throat tight with emotions he hadn't felt in decades, overwhelmed by the realization that this young woman was giving him everything she had, without knowing anything about him, except that he was in need. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on him. He who could afford to buy the entire diner chain was receiving the most valuable gift of his life from someone who couldn't afford her next meal. Her movements were graceful despite her exhaustion, each gesture speaking of a character forged by hardship but not broken by it, and he found himself memorizing every detail of this moment that was reshaping his understanding of true wealth. The storm outside seemed to quiet, as if nature itself was holding its breath in reverence for the miracle unfolding within these simple walls. The plate she set before him was arranged with care that spoke of pride in her work and respect for his dignity. The sandwich cut diagonally, the soup steaming with aromatic promise, the coffee poured to the perfect level. "Here you go," she said simply, but her eyes conveyed so much more, understanding, compassion, and a recognition of his humanity that made James feel more seen than he had in years of being surrounded by people who only valued his wealth. The first bite of the sandwich tasted like redemption, each flavor enhanced by the knowledge that it had been purchased with sacrifice and prepared with love. Emma sat across from him, having poured herself a cup of coffee with hands that no longer trembled, her face serene despite the magnitude of what she had just done. The conversation that followed was gentle and meandering, touching on small things. The weather, the late hour, the comfort of warm food, yet underneath ran a current of connection that neither fully understood, but both felt deeply. James found himself sharing carefully edited stories of life on the streets, while Emma spoke of her dreams and struggles with an openness that made his chest ache with the knowledge of his deception. Yet in this moment, his lies felt less important than the truth of what was happening between them, two souls recognizing each other across the artificial barriers that society had constructed. The diner's clock continued its steady rhythm, marking time that felt both eternal and fleeting, as if they existed in a bubble outside the normal flow of existence. As the meal progressed, Emma watched her mysterious guest with growing fascination, noting the way he held his coffee cup with unexpected refinement, the careful way he spoke that suggested education beneath his rough exterior, the moments when his eyes seemed to hold depths that didn't match his homeless appearance. Yet these observations only deepened her compassion rather than raising suspicion, as she assumed his past held stories of loss and downfall that had led him to this point. James, meanwhile, found himself struggling with the weight of his deception, each kind word from Emma adding to the guilt that was building in his chest like a physical pressure. The $20 she had spent represented more than money. It was a testament to the kind of person she was at her core, someone who would choose compassion over self-preservation, even when it meant risking everything. The rain outside had softened to a gentle patter, and the diner's harsh fluorescent lights seemed warmer now, as if the space itself had been transformed by the act of kindness that had taken place within its walls. James realized that he had found what he was looking for, but the discovery came with a responsibility he hadn't anticipated, the knowledge that Emma's goodness deserved to be rewarded, not just observed. The test was over, but the real challenge was just beginning. How to reveal his true identity without destroying the pure moment they had shared, and how to honor her gift with something worthy of the sacrifice she had made. The empty plate between them seemed to glow with significance, representing not just a meal consumed, but a bridge built between two worlds that should never have intersected. Emma's last $20 had purchased something invaluable. Not just food for a hungry man, but proof that angels still walked among us, disguised as ordinary people, making extraordinary choices. Subscribe to discover how this single act of kindness will transform both their lives in ways neither could have imagined. The rain had stopped by the time James finished his meal, leaving behind a world washed clean and glistening under the streetlights, as if nature itself was preparing for the transformation about to unfold. Emma began clearing the table with the same gentle care she had shown throughout the evening, her movements unhurried despite the late hour, as if she understood instinctively that this moment deserved to be savored rather than rushed. The $20 bill had disappeared into the register, transformed from her last hope into the foundation of something far greater than either of them could comprehend. James watched her work, his heart heavy with the weight of revelation he was about to deliver, knowing that the next few minutes would shatter the simple beauty of what had just occurred between them. The diner felt different now, charged with an energy that had nothing to do with electricity and everything to do with the sacred space that kindness had created within its walls. He reached into his jacket pocket, his fingers closing around the business card that would change everything, yet hesitating because once he revealed his true identity, this perfect moment of pure human connection would be forever altered. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical song overhead, but James heard something else, the sound of destiny shifting, of lives about to be rewritten by the power of compassion meeting opportunity. Emma's exhaustion was visible in the slight slump of her shoulders as she wiped down the counter one final time. Yet there was something peaceful in her expression that spoke of a decision well made, regardless of its cost. She had given everything she had to a stranger, and the rightness of that choice seemed to radiate from her like an inner light that made her beautiful in a way that transcended physical appearance. James stood slowly, his movements deliberate as he prepared to step out of the role he had played and into the truth that would transform her life forever. "Emma," he said, using her name for the first time, reading it from the small plastic tag pinned to her uniform, and something in his tone made her look up with sudden attention. The way he said her name carried weight, as if it held significance beyond mere identification, and she felt a flutter of something, not fear, but anticipation, in her chest. He pulled the business card from his pocket, holding it between them like a bridge between two worlds, his eyes never leaving her face as he prepared to witness the moment when everything she thought she knew about this evening would be turned upside down. The card was simple, elegant, bearing only a name and title that would mean everything. James Morrison, CEO, Morrison Global Enterprises. The silence that followed was profound, filled with the sound of Emma's world shifting on its axis as the implications of what she was seeing began to penetrate her consciousness. The business card trembled in Emma's hands as recognition dawned, her eyes moving from the elegant script to the face of the man she had just fed with her last $20, seeing him now with a clarity that made her knees weak. James Morrison, the name was legendary, associated with a business empire that spanned continents and a personal fortune that made him one of the wealthiest individuals on the planet. The homeless man she had shown kindness to was a billionaire in disguise, and the magnitude of this revelation hit her like a physical blow that left her struggling to breathe. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the diner's appliances, yet carrying within it the weight of a world suddenly turned upside down. James watched her face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and finally a dawning understanding that made her eyes fill with tears she couldn't explain. The fluorescent lights seemed too bright now, illuminating a reality that felt surreal and impossible, yet the business card in her hands was undeniably real, its weight far greater than the paper it was printed on. He had been testing her, she realized, and the thought should have made her angry, but instead she felt something else, a strange mixture of awe and terror at the implications of what her kindness might mean. The diner around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them suspended in a moment that would define the rest of her life. "For months I've been searching," James said, his voice carrying the weight of confession and the tremor of emotion barely held in check. "Searching for proof that genuine kindness still exists in this world, that there are people who will choose compassion over self-interest, even when it costs them everything." His words fell into the silence between them like stones into still water, creating ripples that would spread far beyond this moment. Emma's mind reeled as she tried to process what he was telling her, that her simple act of kindness had been a test, that her choice to feed a hungry stranger had been witnessed by someone with the power to change her life in ways she couldn't begin to imagine. The irony wasn't lost on her that she had given her last $20 to someone who could have bought the entire city block without feeling the cost, yet somehow that made her gesture more meaningful, not less. James continued, his voice growing stronger as he spoke of his disillusionment with a world that had shown him only greed and manipulation, of his desperate need to believe that goodness still existed somewhere in the human heart. The rain-washed windows reflected their images back at them, a billionaire and a waitress, brought together by circumstances that seemed orchestrated by forces beyond their understanding. Emma felt as if she was standing at the edge of a precipice, looking down into a future that was both terrifying and full of infinite possibility. The transformation in James's appearance seemed to happen before her eyes, as if revealing his true identity had stripped away not just his disguise, but the weariness and defeat that had marked his homeless persona. His posture straightened, his eyes cleared, and suddenly Emma could see the powerful businessman beneath the carefully constructed facade. Yet what struck her most was that the kindness in his eyes remained unchanged. "You gave me something tonight that money can't buy," he said, stepping closer, his voice filled with a reverence that made her heart race. "You gave me hope. You proved that there are still people in this world who will choose love over fear, generosity over greed, even when it costs them everything they have." The business card in her hands seemed to pulse with possibility, representing not just wealth, but validation of everything she had ever believed about the power of kindness. Emma felt tears streaming down her cheeks, though she couldn't say whether they were tears of joy, relief, or overwhelming gratitude for the mysterious ways the universe sometimes rewarded those who dared to care. The diner's clock chimed midnight, marking not just the end of one day, but the beginning of a new chapter in both their lives. James reached into his jacket again, this time pulling out a checkbook that seemed to glow with promise in the harsh fluorescent light. "Your rent is due tomorrow," he said, somehow knowing this detail that she had never shared, "and you just spent your last $20 on a stranger. Let me return the favor." The check he wrote seemed to shimmer with impossibility, more money than Emma had ever seen in one place, enough to not just pay her rent, but to transform her entire existence. Yet as she stared at the numbers, she realized that the true gift wasn't the money, but the knowledge that her kindness had mattered, that her choice to see the humanity in a stranger had been witnessed and valued by someone who understood its true worth. The diner around them seemed to glow with new significance, no longer just a place of work, but the sacred ground where two souls had met and recognized something eternal in each other. James's eyes held tears now too, and Emma understood that this moment had changed him as much as it had changed her, that in testing her humanity, he had rediscovered his own. Subscribe to witness how Emma's $20 miracle becomes the foundation for a transformation that will ripple through both their lives and touch countless others. The morning sun filtered through Emma's apartment window as she sat at her small kitchen table, staring at the business card James had left behind. The elegant black lettering seemed to shimmer in the light. James Morrison, CEO, Morrison Global Enterprises. Her coffee grew cold as she turned the card over and over in her trembling fingers, unable to process the magnitude of what had transpired. The man she had fed with her last tip money, the gentle soul she had seen shivering in torn clothes, was one of the most powerful business leaders in the world. Her television flickered in the background, and as if summoned by fate itself, a news anchor's voice cut through her disbelief. "Morrison Global Enterprises announces a revolutionary new charitable initiative." Emma's heart stopped as James's face filled the screen, clean-shaven and wearing an expensive suit, his eyes holding the same kindness she had recognized the night before. The weight of realization crashed over her like a tidal wave, and she understood that her simple act of compassion had been witnessed by someone who could change everything. She thought of her mother's medical bills, the eviction notice hidden beneath a stack of unpaid invoices, the dreams she had buried beneath the crushing weight of survival. James had seen her at her most vulnerable moment when she had chosen love over logic, generosity over self-preservation. The business card felt like a bridge between two worlds, her world of struggle and his world of infinite possibility. She remembered his words about testing people's hearts, and a chill ran down her spine as she realized she had unknowingly passed the most important examination of her life. The phone number on the card seemed to pulse with potential, each digit representing a doorway to a future she had never dared to imagine. Emma's hands shook as she reached for her phone, then pulled back, overwhelmed by the implications of making that call. What would she say to a billionaire who had disguised himself to observe human nature? How could she explain that her kindness hadn't been calculated or performed, but simply the natural response of a heart that refused to harden despite life's relentless blows? She walked to her bathroom mirror and stared at her reflection, seeing the same tired eyes and worn face that had served countless customers, but now understanding that one of those customers had been evaluating not just her service, but her soul. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that reminded her of the diner's unforgiving illumination, yet she felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with external light. She thought of James sitting alone in that booth, testing humanity's capacity for compassion, and felt honored to have been the vessel through which he rediscovered faith in human goodness. The morning stretched endlessly as Emma paced her small apartment, the business card clutched in her palm like a talisman. She imagined James in his corporate office, surrounded by luxury and power, yet carrying the memory of her simple gesture in his heart. The contrast between his two identities fascinated and humbled her. The homeless man who had touched her soul, and the billionaire who could reshape her destiny were the same person, united by a profound understanding of what truly mattered in life. She wondered how many others had failed his test, how many had looked at his disguised form with disgust or indifference, never recognizing the divine spark that poverty could never extinguish. Her own poverty had become the crucible that revealed her character, and she felt a strange pride in having passed a test she never knew she was taking. The sunlight streaming through her window seemed brighter now, as if the universe itself was acknowledging the significance of the moment when two souls had recognized each other across the vast divide of circumstance. Emma finally gathered the courage to dial the number, her heart hammering against her ribs as each ring echoed through the phone. When James's familiar voice answered, warm and immediate, she felt tears spring to her eyes at the genuine joy in his greeting. "Emma," he said, as if her call was the most natural thing in the world, "I was hoping you would reach out." His words dissolved her nervousness, replacing it with the same comfortable connection they had shared in the diner booth. She found herself speaking freely about her shock, her gratitude, and her confusion about why he had chosen to test humanity in such a personal way. James listened with the same attentive presence he had shown as a homeless man, and she realized that his wealth had never changed the essential kindness that defined him. Their conversation flowed like a river, finding its natural course, two people who had seen each other's true hearts and found them worthy of trust and respect. As their phone call deepened into something resembling a sacred conversation, Emma understood that her life was about to transform in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. James spoke of his foundation's mission to identify and support individuals who embodied genuine compassion, people like her who gave freely even when they had nothing left to give. His voice carried the weight of someone who had searched long and hard for authentic goodness in a world often corrupted by greed and self-interest. Emma felt chosen, not just for financial support, but as a partner in a mission to spread kindness throughout a world that desperately needed healing. The business card in her hand no longer felt like a bridge between two worlds, but like a key to a door she was finally ready to walk through. Subscribe to witness how a single act of compassion becomes the foundation for a movement that will change countless lives forever. 3 days later, Emma stood in the lobby of Morrison Global Enterprises, her best dress feeling inadequate against the marble floors and crystal chandeliers that surrounded her. The security guard who had escorted her upstairs treated her with a respect that felt foreign after years of being invisible to those with power and privilege. As the elevator climbed toward the executive floors, she watched the city shrink below her, each floor representing a step away from the life of struggle she had always known. Her reflection in the polished elevator doors showed a young woman on the precipice of transformation, her eyes bright with possibility, yet grounded by the humility that had brought her to this moment. The elevator chimed softly as it reached the top floor, and Emma stepped into a world where her compassion would be valued as the rarest and most precious commodity of all. James's office was a testament to success. Yet Emma noticed immediately how he had arranged the space to feel welcoming rather than intimidating. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city, but James sat not behind an imposing desk, but in a comfortable seating area that invited conversation and connection. When he rose to greet her, Emma saw both versions of the man she had met: the vulnerable soul who had tested her heart, and the powerful leader who could move mountains with a single decision. His embrace was warm and genuine, erasing any awkwardness about their vastly different circumstances. The expensive suit couldn't hide the essential kindness in his eyes, the same quality that had drawn her to help him when he appeared to have nothing. Emma felt a profound sense of rightness, as if this meeting had been orchestrated by forces greater than either of them could understand. "I want to show you something," James said, leading her to a wall covered with photographs and documents that told the story of his foundation's work around the world. Each image represented a life transformed by compassion, a person who had been lifted from despair by the kind of generosity Emma had shown without thinking. She saw schools built in impoverished communities, medical clinics serving the forgotten, and scholarship programs that turned dreams into reality. James explained how each project had begun with someone like her, an individual who had demonstrated authentic kindness when they thought no one was watching. Emma's eyes filled with tears as she realized that her simple act of buying dinner for a homeless man had connected her to a global network of compassion that spanned continents and cultures. The wall of photographs wasn't just a record of good deeds. It was a testament to the power of human kindness to create ripple effects that could change the world. James turned to face Emma directly, his expression serious, yet filled with hope. "I've been searching for someone like you for years," he said, his voice carrying the weight of genuine conviction. "Someone who gives not because they have abundance, but because they understand that sharing our humanity is the only thing that truly matters." He explained his vision for a new initiative that would identify and support individuals who embodied authentic compassion, creating a network of kindness that could address the world's most pressing problems. Emma listened in amazement as he outlined plans for community centers, educational programs, and support systems that would be built around the principle that every person deserved dignity and care. The scope of his vision was breathtaking, yet she understood that it all began with the simple recognition that kindness was the most powerful force for change in the universe. Emma found her voice, speaking from a place of deep authenticity about her own experiences with poverty and struggle. She shared stories of customers who had been cruel, managers who had exploited her desperation, and moments when she had questioned whether goodness existed in the world at all. Yet she also spoke of the small acts of kindness that had sustained her. A regular customer who always left an extra dollar, a co-worker who had covered her shift when her mother was hospitalized, strangers who had smiled when she felt invisible. James listened with the same intense attention he had shown in the diner, and Emma realized that her stories of struggle weren't weaknesses to be overcome, but strengths that qualified her for the work ahead. Her poverty had taught her empathy, her hardships had refined her compassion, and her choice to remain kind, despite everything, had proven her character in ways that no amount of wealth or education could match. As their conversation deepened, Emma began to understand that James wasn't offering her charity, but partnership. He spoke of her role in the foundation not as a recipient of aid, but as a leader who could guide their efforts with the wisdom that came from lived experience. The financial support he offered would free her from the crushing weight of survival, but more importantly, it would allow her to dedicate her life to the work of spreading compassion throughout the world. Emma felt a profound shift occurring within her, as if she was stepping into a version of herself she had always been meant to become. The scared, struggling waitress was transforming into a woman with purpose and power, someone who could turn her pain into healing for others. Subscribe to discover how Emma's journey from poverty to purpose becomes a beacon of hope for millions around the world. 6 months later, Emma stood before a crowd of 500 people in the grand ballroom of the Morrison Foundation's headquarters, her voice steady and clear as she shared her story with an audience that included business leaders, philanthropists, and community activists from around the world. The transformation in her appearance was striking. Gone were the tired eyes and worn clothing of her waitressing days, replaced by the confident bearing of someone who had found her true calling. Yet the essence of who she was remained unchanged. The same compassion that had moved her to feed a homeless man with her last tip money now radiated from the stage as she spoke about the power of small acts of kindness to create massive change. The audience hung on every word, recognizing in her story a reflection of their own capacity for goodness and transformation. Her journey from struggling waitress to foundation leader had become a symbol of hope for anyone who had ever wondered whether their individual actions could make a difference in the world. The Morrison Foundation's Compassion Initiative had grown beyond James's wildest expectations, with Emma serving as its heart and guiding spirit. Under her leadership, they had established community centers in 12 cities, each one designed to provide not just material support, but genuine human connection for those who had been forgotten by society. Emma insisted that every center be staffed by people who had experienced hardship themselves, understanding that authentic compassion could only come from those who had walked through darkness and chosen to remain lights for others. The waiting lists for their programs stretched for months, not because people were seeking handouts, but because they were hungry for the kind of dignity and respect that Emma had shown to James in that diner booth. Each center became a beacon of hope in neighborhoods that had been written off by the rest of the world, proving that transformation was possible when people were treated with genuine love and respect. Emma's days were filled with site visits, planning meetings, and one-on-one conversations with individuals whose lives had been touched by the Foundation's work. She never forgot the feeling of counting her last few dollars, and that memory informed every decision she made about how resources should be allocated and programs should be designed. In Detroit, she met Maria, a single mother who had been living in her car with her 2 children, until the Foundation's housing program gave her a fresh start and job training that led to stable employment. In Phoenix, she worked with David, a veteran struggling with addiction, who found purpose and community through the Foundation's peer support programs. Each story reinforced Emma's belief that every person carried within them the potential for transformation, regardless of how far they had fallen or how hopeless their circumstances appeared. The Foundation's success wasn't measured just in numbers, but in the light that returned to people's eyes when they realized someone believed in their worth. James watched Emma's evolution with a mixture of pride and amazement, recognizing that his decision to test humanity's compassion had led to something far greater than he had ever imagined. During their weekly strategy meetings, he often found himself learning from her insights about poverty, resilience, and the complex factors that kept people trapped in cycles of despair. Emma's lived experience gave her a perspective that no amount of education or research could provide, and her recommendations consistently led to more effective and meaningful programs. She had become not just the face of the foundation, but its conscience, ensuring that their work remained grounded in authentic human connection rather than becoming another well-intentioned but disconnected charitable enterprise. Their partnership had evolved into something resembling a deep friendship, built on mutual respect and a shared commitment to using their resources to heal a broken world. The media attention surrounding Emma's story had created a phenomenon that neither she nor James had anticipated. News outlets around the world had picked up the tale of the waitress who used her last tip to feed a homeless billionaire, and the story had gone viral across social media platforms, inspiring millions of people to examine their own capacity for kindness. Emma received thousands of letters and emails from individuals sharing their own stories of compassion, creating an informal network of people committed to making kindness a priority in their daily lives. Schools began teaching her story as an example of how individual actions could create massive change, and businesses started implementing Emma policies that encouraged employees to look for opportunities to help others. The ripple effect of her single act of generosity had become a wave of compassion that was washing over communities around the globe, proving that goodness was contagious when given the right conditions to spread. As Emma prepared for bed in her new apartment, modest by choice, comfortable by design, she reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her from desperation to purpose. The financial security that James had provided was wonderful, but the true gift had been the opportunity to turn her pain into healing for others. She thought of all the people whose lives had been touched by the Foundation's work, and she understood that her story was really their story, a testament to the human capacity for transformation when people were treated with dignity and given genuine opportunities to thrive. The scared young woman who had counted her last few dollars in a diner booth had become a leader whose influence was spreading around the world. Yet she never forgot that it all began with a simple choice to see the humanity in someone who appeared to have nothing. Subscribe to witness how one woman's compassion creates a global movement that transforms millions of lives. 1 year after their first meeting, James invited Emma to join him on a journey that would reveal the full scope of his mission and the deeper reasons behind his elaborate test of human compassion. They traveled together to a small town in rural Montana, where James had grown up in poverty before his business acumen and relentless determination had lifted him to unimaginable wealth. As their car wound through the familiar streets of his childhood, James shared stories that Emma had never heard, tales of hunger, shame, and the crushing weight of being invisible in a world that valued people only for what they could provide. His voice carried the same vulnerability she had heard in the diner, and Emma realized that the homeless disguise hadn't been just a test, but a return to a version of himself he had never truly left behind. The billionaire and the homeless man weren't separate identities, but different facets of the same soul, shaped by experiences that wealth could never erase. They stopped at a small cemetery on the outskirts of town, where James led Emma to a simple gravestone, marked with his mother's name and dates that revealed she had died when he was just 16 years old. Kneeling beside the grave, James spoke in a voice thick with emotion about the woman who had taught him that kindness was the only currency that truly mattered, even when they had nothing else to give. His mother had worked 3 jobs to keep food on their table, yet she always found ways to help neighbors who were struggling even more than they were. She had died from a treatable illness because they couldn't afford proper medical care, and James had spent his entire adult life building wealth not for its own sake, but as a tool to ensure that no one else would suffer the way his family had suffered. Emma understood now that his foundation wasn't just philanthropy, but a living memorial to a woman who had embodied the kind of compassion that could transform the world. James revealed that his test of human compassion wasn't a one-time experiment, but an ongoing mission that had taken him to cities around the globe, always in disguise, always searching for individuals who would choose kindness over self-interest. He had been disappointed countless times by people who looked at his homeless appearance with disgust or indifference, their reactions confirming his growing fear that wealth and comfort had corrupted humanity's capacity for genuine care. Emma was the first person in over 2 years of testing who had not only helped him, but had done so with such natural grace and authentic concern that she had restored his faith in human goodness. Her simple act of buying dinner with her last tip money had proven that compassion still existed in its purest form, untainted by calculation or expectation of reward. The relief in his voice as he shared this revelation made Emma understand that she had saved him as much as he had saved her. As they sat together in the quiet cemetery, Emma shared her own deeper truths about the night they had met. She confessed that she had been contemplating giving up entirely, that the weight of her struggles had brought her to a breaking point where she questioned whether life was worth the constant battle for survival. Seeing James alone in that booth, recognizing the loneliness and hunger in his eyes, had reminded her that she wasn't the only person fighting invisible battles. Choosing to help him had been as much about saving herself as saving him, an act of defiance against the despair that threatened to consume her spirit. In that moment of giving, she had rediscovered her own humanity and remembered that connection with others was the only thing that made suffering bearable. James listened with tears in his eyes, understanding that their meeting had been a mutual rescue, two souls finding each other at exactly the moment when both needed proof that goodness still existed in the world. The conversation that followed was unlike any they had shared before, a deep exploration of pain, purpose, and the mysterious forces that bring people together when they need each other most. James spoke of his guilt about having so much while others suffered, and his constant struggle to use his wealth in ways that honored his mother's memory and values. Emma shared her ongoing fears about whether she was worthy of the opportunities she had been given and her determination to never forget the lessons that poverty had taught her about resilience and empathy. They talked about the responsibility that came with their platform and the weight of knowing that their story had inspired millions of people to examine their own capacity for kindness. As the sun set over the Montana landscape, they made a pact to continue their work together, not as benefactor and recipient, but as partners united by a shared commitment to healing a world that desperately needed examples of authentic love in action. The drive back to the airport was filled with a comfortable silence that spoke of deep understanding and mutual respect. Emma gazed out at the landscape that had shaped James's character, seeing in the vast sky and rolling hills a reflection of the limitless possibilities that opened when people chose compassion over fear. She thought of all the lives that had been touched by their foundation's work, and she understood that each transformation was a ripple in an ever-expanding circle of healing that would continue long after they were gone. James glanced at her profile and smiled, knowing that his mother would have loved Emma's fierce dedication to lifting others up, her refusal to let success change her essential kindness. Their partnership had become something sacred, a living testament to the power of two people who had found each other across impossible circumstances and chosen to use their connection to serve something greater than themselves. Subscribe to discover how their deepened bond creates a legacy that will inspire generations to choose compassion over indifference. 5 years after their first meeting, Emma stood once again in a diner booth, but this time she was accompanied by a film crew documenting the global impact of the Morrison Foundation's work. The diner had been transformed into a community center that served free meals to anyone in need, while also providing job training, counseling services, and a safe space for people to connect with others who understood their struggles. The booth where she had first encountered James had been preserved as a symbol of how small acts of kindness could create massive change, and visitors from around the world came to sit where two strangers had recognized each other's humanity across the vast divide of circumstance. Emma's voice was steady and warm as she told their story to the camera, her words carrying the weight of someone who had lived through transformation and dedicated her life to creating the same possibility for others. The scared young waitress was now a confident leader whose influence had spread to every continent, yet she never forgot the moment when choosing compassion over self-preservation had changed everything. The Morrison Foundation had grown into a global network of compassion centers, each one designed around the principle that every person deserved dignity, respect, and genuine opportunities for transformation. Under Emma's leadership, they had developed innovative programs that addressed not just immediate needs, but the underlying systems that kept people trapped in cycles of poverty and despair. Their work had been studied by governments, replicated by other organizations, and celebrated as a model for how authentic human connection could solve problems that traditional approaches had failed to address. Emma's insistence that every program be led by people with lived experience had created a new paradigm in social work, one that recognized that those who had survived hardship were often the most qualified to guide others through similar challenges. The Foundation's success wasn't measured just in numbers, but in the countless stories of transformation that proved healing was possible when people were treated with genuine love and respect. James had stepped back from day-to-day operations to focus on expanding their model internationally, but he remained Emma's closest advisor and friend. Their weekly conversations had become a sacred ritual, a time when they could reflect on the deeper meaning of their work and support each other through the challenges that came with carrying such responsibility. He often marveled at how Emma had evolved from someone who needed saving into someone who was saving others, yet he recognized that her capacity for leadership had always been there, waiting for the right circumstances to emerge. Their partnership had become a testament to the power of mutual respect and shared purpose, proving that the most effective change happened when people from different backgrounds united around common values. James's wealth had provided the resources, but Emma's wisdom and authenticity had provided the soul that made their work genuinely transformative. The documentary being filmed would tell their story to a global audience, but Emma insisted that the focus remain on the people whose lives had been touched by the Foundation's work, rather than on her personal journey from poverty to prominence. She had learned that true leadership meant amplifying other voices rather than seeking attention for herself, and she used every platform to highlight the stories of individuals who had overcome incredible obstacles to rebuild their lives. The film crew followed her through community centers in Detroit, Los Angeles, and Atlanta, capturing the moment when people realized that someone believed in their potential for transformation. Each interaction reinforced Emma's belief that every person carried within them the capacity for greatness, regardless of how far they had fallen or how hopeless their circumstances appeared. The documentary would become a powerful tool for spreading their message, but Emma knew that the real impact happened in the quiet moments when one human being chose to see the divine spark in another. As the filming concluded, Emma found herself alone in the preserved booth where her journey had begun, running her fingers along the worn table surface that had witnessed the moment when two souls recognized each other across impossible circumstances. She thought of James's mother, whose example of compassion had shaped his character and ultimately led to the creation of a global movement for kindness. She thought of her own mother, whose medical bills had been paid by the Foundation and who now volunteered at their community center. her face glowing with pride as she watched her daughter lead with the same values she had instilled despite their poverty. The circle of healing that had begun with a simple act of generosity had expanded to touch millions of lives, creating ripple effects that would continue for generations. Emma understood that their story wasn't really about her or James, but about the eternal truth that love was the most powerful force in the universe, capable of transforming any situation when people had the courage to choose compassion over fear. The sun was setting as Emma prepared to leave the diner that had become a shrine to the power of human kindness. She paused at the door to look back at the booth one more time, remembering the scared young woman who had counted her last few dollars and chosen to feed a stranger rather than save herself. That woman's courage had created a legacy that would outlive them all, proving that no act of love was ever too small to change the world. Emma smiled as she stepped into the evening air, knowing that somewhere in the city other acts of compassion were taking place. Small gestures of kindness that would create their own ripple effects of healing and transformation. The story that had begun with a waitress and a homeless man had become eternal, a testament to the truth that every person had the power to choose love over indifference and create miracles through the simple act of caring for another human being. Subscribe to be part of a movement that proves compassion is the most powerful force for change in our world.